business class champagne one day, dodging motorbikes in downtown Kampala the next. Would you travel 16 hours on a rain-soaked bus, risk having your phone snatched, and watch football from an active construction site just to experience a new football culture? I did. I traded Christmas parties in Manchester for Uganda's most heated football derby, where VIP meant plastic chairs and a shared portaloo. I'm Martino, and this is what happens when you chase a beautiful game to East Africa. After an amazing experience last Christmas in Nepal, I decided this time of year would be my big annual adventure going forward. Every trip starts out with one main intention, and this time it was an eventual visit to Rwanda, to see the mountain gorillas up close and personal after my travel buddy Casey put the suggestion on the table. Once that was decided, the next step was a few hours flicking between SofaScore and Skyscanner, planning the cheapest route to the final destination via a country with a full football fixture schedule. And in this case I was drawn to their East African neighbours, Uganda. Needless to say, I got a few puzzled looks when explaining why I couldn't attend a plethora of Christmas parties I turned down. But why the bloody hell not, eh? I've got 11 months of the year to spend with family and friends, so why not make the most of the extended holiday period and get away from the long, cold, rainy nights in Manchester? My first flight en route to Uganda was booked and it had me stopping in Cairo, Egypt. Chosen on the basis that Al Ahly were to play at home in the African Champions League to Belouizdad of Algeria. Bonza. What a way to start the trip. But in typical style, this was moved due to a FIFA Intercontinental Cup semi-final that they somehow transpired to blow in the most dramatic of penalty shootouts. This left me with nothing but a few iconic pyramid photos and some lovely social occasions to show for my time in Egypt. But the country left a mark, and with so many friendly people and amazing cities and sights to see, I certainly intend to return someday to take in a match. Sadly, without budget airlines in this part of Africa, it was to be a rather expensive flight with Qatar Airways via Doha to get me to Entebbe, Uganda's only international airport. However, this flight was going to be one with a difference. Boarding in Doha, I was told that the plane had been downsized and I would need to change seat. What followed were the glorious words I've been waiting to hear all my life. "We're going to offer you a free upgrade, sir." Play it cool, Trig, play it cool.
I think we're on a winner here, Trig. All right? Play it nice and cool, son. Nice and cool, you know what I mean?
I didn't quite believe it until I took my seat. Champagne before takeoff. The most polite and attentive staff. 3-course meal chosen from a full menu with a wine list stating what food it would complement. Truly bloody wonderful. When the delightful air hostess informed me it was a 6-hour flight, I had a smile from ear to ear which didn't shift for the whole journey. I avoided the beer as this was a special occasion, and made sure I stayed on the right side of being too inebriated. The pork with cheese board was a delightful way to finish off the meal before snoozing for the last hour. The best flight I'll ever have put me in the highest of spirits for my late night arrival in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Placed on the northern shores of Lake Victoria, Uganda's nickname was coined by none other than Winston Churchill in his days as an explorer. He was inspired by their stunning landscapes, abundant wildlife and diversity emphasised by its 10 national parks of incredible natural beauty. Particularly stunning are the Murchison Falls, Queen Elizabeth National Park and the Ziwa Rhino Sanctuary. That's before even mentioning the inspiring work done to preserve the existence of the mountain gorillas in the Burundi Impenetrable National Park. The 8th most populous country in Africa and one of the fastest growing, with over 75% of their population under 30. The nation of approximately 50 million inhabitants became a protectorate of the British Empire in 1894. This helped to prevent a civil war between battling religious factions jostling for power at the time. Some 68 years later, Uganda eased into independence. In the intervening years, a military coup led by the infamous Idi Amin was one of the deadliest dictatorships in African history. In 1986, the National Resistance Party took control and the country has been led by Yoweri Kaguta Museveni ever since. Another key member of this group was the now Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who we'll hear a lot more about in future. Despite years of rebel fighting, there is now a level of peace in Uganda. However, these rebel groups still operate in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's always the potential for instability. I'll be watching intently to see if Museveni stands for an 8th term in the next elections in 2026, and how things develop from there. After a late night arrival in Entebbe, I made a quick getaway the next day. Nothing against the city, only that with limited time I aim to head cross-country to the tourist city of Jinja that evening. First up was a 45-minute minibus to Kampala, which cost less than £1. Perfect. A seamless journey along the only high-quality road in the country, joining the airport to the capital. Driving on the left due to the historical colonial influences, All vehicles seemed to be Japanese to suit the right-hand drive. Unfortunately, this led to many drivers being unable to operate the in-car systems like radio and sat-nav, which was rather comical to observe. Seconds before alighting, the lady on my right turned to me and in perfect English warned me that I shouldn't walk around with my phone out, and that it should be hidden at all times. The threat of having it snatched was real. As the week progressed, I would be warned on countless occasions that it would likely be grabbed from my hand if I had it out. It was also reiterated that there wouldn't be any violence in these robbings, so, if concealed, there should be no issues. However, this initial warning did leave me on edge, and looking around feeling that I needed to be wary of everybody. Not a nice feeling. Amazing how one piece of advice can leave you looking around like everyone is a criminal. The lady kindly chaperoned me to a safe space where I could call an Uber from a petrol station. An Uber journey which was by far my strangest by the time we'd even left the petrol station.
So I've been in Kampala 5 minutes, fucking crazy. Got on a bike with this woman, she told me, keep your phone hidden, it's pretty dangerous and scary. Got in an Uber to my next place, and a bus crashed into the Uber. And the Uber driver casually got out, the guy drove off, he jumped on the back of a motorbike and he's gone to chase him, leaving me in the back of my Uber.
5 minutes later, I was none the wiser with what was going on and remembered I could still message the driver on the app. Are you coming back, mate? Not even lunchtime on day one in Uganda and already I was seeing TIA.
TIA, right, mate?
TIA.
What's TIA?
This is Africa, huh?
He eventually returned without locating the driver and looking rather downbeat. On completion of the journey, I let him keep the change from a tenner. That'll go a long way in this part of the world and returned a big smile to his face. I must say, downtown Kampala is probably the most vibrant and chaotic place I've ever been to. Music blaring from every other shop, people squeezing past each other in the street on their way to trade goods of some sort or other. It made Christmas shopping on Oxford Street seem like a Sunday afternoon stroll in the countryside. The lack of cars in this area made things even more chaotic as every centimetre of space was battled for with bikes, motorbikes and pedestrians all trying to get to the next destination. A feeling that really gets the heart racing and makes you feel alive. Just a shame I couldn't film any of the further due to the obvious risks involved. In the coming days I noticed that the lack of road rage as exemplified by the Uber crash, and in hindsight in Egypt and India before that, it seemed the more reckless the driving, the more tolerant the drivers. The horns are constant as a sign that you were there, but nothing more. One time a lad had his bike half trapped under a car. A couple of exchanged looks, a brief reversal from the car to free up the bike, and off they both went. A rather interesting dynamic. Next up, the pandemonium of Kampala Taxi Park. Taxi being the name for the minibuses that go both around and between the cities. After a passerby helpfully directed me to the taxi to Jinja, I took my place among the locals. By now the heat was picking up and the humidity was rising. It'd be nice to be on the road for the lengthy journey and get some breeze flowing through the vehicle. But not in Africa. Memories of my last visit here to this part of the world in Tanzania some 10 years earlier came flooding back. These taxis don't leave on a schedule. They leave when they're full. Countless people pop their heads in the window trying to sell everything you can imagine that can be carried in a container on your head. From fresh fruit and drink to electronics. Polite smile and no thank you. Times 50. The wait continued, but this is not a part of the world to get stressed or impatient. It's just not how they roll. You just have to take a deep breath, get in the zone and go with the flow. Otherwise you'll be searching for the first plane home within a couple of days. An hour or so later we finally made our way out of the taxi park and on the manic bumpy roads out of Kampala. 4 hours later landing in Jinja and straight on a boda to the hostel. A serene, peaceful and tranquil ambience where I bumped into my two new roommates for the next couple of days. Miguel from Spain in his late 40s who had travelled to 120 plus countries, and Gavin from Newcastle living a similar style existence to myself. Over the next few days it was a pleasure to chat with such like-minded people in the same age bracket. Jinja is known as Uganda's adventure capital. Plenty of adrenaline-packed activities to keep you entertained. Whitewater rafting, bungee jumping and the more relaxing tubing. It's also the location for the source of the Nile River, so heading out on a river cruise is another popular activity. Due to doing some of these later in the trip and general bad planning, I ended up doing none of the above. A gentle venture downtown to check out the intensity of the local markets was about as dramatic as it got for me. But this was a joy in itself, and I even managed to pick up the national team footy shirt for a bargain, £4. On our return, we spotted a footy match about to kick off. Sadly, my bad planning meant we couldn't stay and watch, but the collection of enormous spiders behind the goals meant it wasn't the worst feeling. God bless those goalkeepers retrieving the ball from there. Much like Egypt, I'd failed as a tourist, but had some very fulfilling and enjoyable discussions with newfound friends. Quite often these can be the most rewarding part of these adventures, especially when you can get a bottle of Nile for less than £2 to complement the mood. As well as the wonderful company, we were continually impressed by the beautiful fresh food in Uganda, whether it be the local dish Rolex or the tilapia fished directly out of the Nile. And with bananas so sweet and tasty, it was easy to see why Uganda has the highest banana consumption per capita in the world. My time in Jinja was done, so I was back to the capital to see what it had to offer. Typically, I'd left late in the day after lunching by the Nile, so by the time we were stuck in traffic on the outskirts of Kampala, day was quickly turning into night. As the darkness descended, my fellow taxi passengers who had previously shown no indication of speaking English began to warn me not to step out of the bus to let people off, and to do all I could to keep the world from knowing there was a tourist on the bus. These warnings again put me on edge and even had me avoiding eye contact through the closed windows as the locals peered in from the unlit streets. Eventually I arrived safely in Kampala, but miles from my hostel. I found the nearest security guards fully equipped with rifles before getting my phone out to call a border via Uber. Safely back at the hostel, it was at long last time to relax and enjoy a couple of beers. Finally, the day I'd been waiting for, Matchday. Through the couch surfing app, I'd managed to locate someone who was actually interested in Ugandan football. English Premier League? Everyone has a team, and most seemed genuinely keen, but to find someone who supported the local game was a rarity. So, when I met up with Maya, I was impressed to hear her knowledge on the sport, talking about the rivalries and the year she had spent watching her cousin who had played at the top level here. Given there were a few fixtures in the capital over the days I had in Kampala, I left it to Maya to decide which would be the best, and she suggested the derby between Kampala City Authority FC and Sports Club Villa, bringing together the two most successful teams in the history of Ugandan football. Perfect timing. As with so many countries, football was introduced to Uganda by British missionaries in 1897, and that influence has remained to this day as football remains the national sport of Uganda, with tremendous love for the Premier League. What is now the wonderfully named FUFA, the Federation of Ugandan Football Associations, was formed in 1924, and 2 years later the national team, the Cranes, named after the national bird, made their debut on the international stage with a 1-1 draw versus Kenya. The highlight of Ugandan football came in 1978, when they made the final of the African Nations Cup, but sadly couldn't get over the line for victory as they suffered a 2-0 defeat to Ghana at the final hurdle. Although very much against the odds, they will have another stab at the title later this year, as they have successfully qualified for the 2025 AFCON to be held in Morocco. See you there? If not, maybe back here in 2027 when Uganda will co-host with East African neighbours Tanzania and Kenya. The inaugural National Ugandan League, which now has 2 professional divisions, was established in 1968 and won by Prisons FC, now known as Maroon FC. 30 of the 55 titles since then have been shared between today's adversaries in KCCA and SC Villa. Villa won their first title in 1982 and proceeded to dominate Ugandan football, winning 16 of the next 22 championships. Strangely, 20 years in the wilderness followed before returning to the top of the pile last year. Hopes of retaining that position look a distant dream as they lie in 8th going into this evening's encounter. KCCA, on the other hand, are looking to add to their 13 titles and their first since 2019. Currently lying 3rd in the table, but, like Villa, struggling for form. A win was very much needed to keep them in touch with their rivals. Stadium MTN Amondi was the venue of tonight's clash, MTN, the telecom company, being the sponsor, and Philip Amondi, a club legend who played and managed KCCA. He also represented his country, including being the tournament's top scorer in the aforementioned 1978 run to the AFCON final. The stadium was very much under construction for the night's encounter, despite recent reassurances it would be complete by December 24. This was way off the mark, and it remained a building site as we took our seats in the VIP section. The previous stadium would barely meet non-league regulations in the UK, but the new stand was going to be a cracker and bring the attendance up to 10,000. The route to our seats was quite a unique occurrence as we literally walked through the building site and were just free to roam. The differing health and safety standards in various parts of the world never fails to make me smile. I do, however, love the African attitude of, if you do something stupid, then it's your fault, compared to the English way of somehow blaming the building owner. The makeshift VIP section was literally made up of white plastic chairs, admittedly with the best view in the stadium. There was even a VVIP section reserved for the most important of spectators, including politicians and former coaches. Their additional entitlement was a yellow cover over their white plastic chair, akin to a wedding venue. Back to the night's proceedings, and the match started at a good pace with real desire and passion. There was no holding back in the tackles. Players were still flying in wholeheartedly to challenge they had no chance of winning. They played football like the border drivers rode through town, with one single mission and no regard for their own personal safety. Quite a joy to watch. Also worth noting, there was little time wasting and rolling around, no doubt influenced by years of watching the Premier League rather than La Liga. Half-time came without much action, but things livened up somewhat in the second period. Sadat Onaku rose highest at the back post to give KCCA the lead in the 64th minute.
Good! Oh, it's in the back of the net! Sadat Onaku from the closest to Bangkok is scoring his third goal of the season. And what does he do? He gets the chair and sits.
Only for Patrick Jonah Kakande to equalise for SC Villa 4 minutes later, despite doing everything he could to miss the easiest chance he'll ever have. Finally, the energetic fans had something to cheer and we could enjoy that lively African energy around the stadium. Villa came close again when Charles Luanga cut in from the left and struck the bar with a thunderous effort from a tight angle. KCC also came close on the break, but it was to remain 1-1 and probably a fair result all round, with neither side doing enough to deserve the 3 points. A really enjoyable game to be at. It very much had an English non-league feeling about the whole place, and my first opportunity to watch a game from a construction site, sharing one unlit portaloo between us. Beer was also sold out of a cool box just behind us. Overall, very raw and authentic, and a stadium I look forward to seeing in action once the main stand is fully complete. The completed renovation will be one small step in repairing the reputation of Ugandan football, which has suffered in recent years due to cases of match fixing. Last year, 13 individuals, including 10 referees, were banned by FIFA. Sadly, it's not the first time Ugandan football has been embroiled in a similar scandal. In 2003, SC Villa needed a major turnaround in goal difference to snatch the title when they took on already relegated Akol FC on the final day of the season. Needless to say, title rivals Express FC had reason to feel suspicious when they came off the pitch to hear that Villa had pulled out a miraculous 22-1 victory to win the league by 3 goals. Well, to win by 1 would have looked a bit too suspicious, right? Amazingly, the result stood, but there was a drop-off in support and media coverage due to the complete loss of any integrity of the domestic game. In 2015, in this very fixture, a contentious penalty decision and a later red card led to pitch invasions and eventual abandonment of the game. Again, suspicions of foul play from the referee was at the forefront of the fans' thoughts. I must admit, at the time of the contest, I wasn't aware of the match-fixing history, but later in my trip in Rwanda, I was told it was possible to get information for Ugandan football and bet on it. It's abundantly clear now how prevalent the issue is. As much as it was great to see 2 of the best teams in the country, Mai also taught me about the tribal tournaments that they have here in Uganda. There are 56 tribes in total, making it one of the most ethnically diverse countries in Africa. Baganda is the most influential tribe in the country, and their language, Ugandan, is the most widely spoken in Uganda. The Bikabia Baganda Football Championship is the best known in the country and has been held since 1950. An amazing concept that continues to promote the traditions and foster cultural unity. Again, it'd be something cool to return to see someday. Post-match, we had no set plan, but thankfully Mai was up for continuing with the festivities, so we took the short 5-minute walk to Kyadondo Rugby Club, which basically doubled as a nightclub. Great vibe and atmosphere where the bill kept rocking. Perfect way to end the night after stopping by a couple of other bars. The next morning, my only plan was to grab some food and watch Man City play the English Villa on TV. The destination of choice was to take the 45-minute ride down to Lake Victoria, where the fish were being taken straight from the lake right in front of our eyes. We selected our fish and enjoyed the vibes with typical Ugandan band music keeping the spirits high. While the food was prepared and cooked, we chilled out watching the continuation of Man City's miraculous fall from grace. What a way to while away the afternoon. The tilapia was stunning and left us thoroughly satisfied and ready for a breather. This pretty much rounded off my jaunt in Uganda, and it was time to depart. I'd always planned to go for the overland border crossing into Rwanda, but when my alarm went off at 5 AM and I could hear the torrential rain outside hammering off the corrugated tin roofs, I was wishing I'd opted for the £100 hour-long flight. But hey-ho, we're here for an adventure, right? Back in the comfort of my own home in Manchester, the 9 hours on Google Maps didn't seem too terrible. Warnings of crazy traffic as people headed back to the villages for Christmas, and some less than efficient roads meant I could be in for a surprise as people laughed in the face of my suggestion of 9 hours. The Uber driver picked me up, and as we passed the nightclubs, there were still partying revellers well into the early hours, a staple of the Kampala nightlife despite the weather. I took my seat on the toilet-free bus and vowed not to drink a thing until I arrived in Rwanda. We set off punctually, and my time in Uganda was coming to an end. A pastor of some sort came on to bless the bus and the travellers on the journey, which was a lovely touch. But, somewhat ironically, as he delivered his final message, the driver clipped a passing border rider who spun out into the road, sliding through the puddles. But, in typical Ugandan style, he just got up, jumped back on his bike and went on his way. The horrendous downpour really left its mark on the city, but thankfully the bus powered through, and once out of the city, there were no issues. Passing over the equator and then the Rwandan border added some interest to the journey. The border incurred a full baggage search, and the story of Rwanda not allowing plastic bags was validated when the guard removed a loose bag and chucked it in the bin. Can't fault him. I must say, in all my travels I'd never felt so different than at the border crossing. The way a couple of the locals looked me up and down in just sheer amazement at the colour of my skin, or maybe just the suspect attire, was really quite striking. All done with intrigue rather than anything more sinister, but it always adds a little extra to the experience. 12 hours in, just crossed the border, still waiting to move. 4 to 5 hours to go. This is my only safe place, hanging out the window. Music. Some prick flipping through some Instagram stories about 1 centimetre from my head. The worst thing. Other than that, it's actually been alright. Yeah, this is my first. Starting to get pissed off. After a mini wobble at the border, I gathered my composure and got back to it. We immediately switched to driving on the right, and I spent half an hour with my head out the window, waving to the passers-by who were delighted to return the greeting. A heartwarming experience. All in all, not a terrible journey, and when I arrived in Kigali some 16 hours after departure, I was well and truly ready for a rest. And that was that. Another country visited, and a wonderful adventure. A nation I knew next to nothing about before visiting. Despite the threat of phone robbery, in reality I didn't encounter even the slightest moment where anyone had made me feel uncomfortable. The local people were smiley, friendly and incredibly welcoming without being overbearing. A perfect balance. But what about as a footy trip? As always, I'll rate Uganda as a footy trip out of 100 across 10 different categories and let you know if it's worth a visit. Team ability. City rivals Vipers SC are currently leading the way as the best club in Uganda, ranked 49th in Africa. That fact and the quality I saw on show, it's hard to score them highly. 2 out of 10. Atmosphere. One stand behind the net had a lively atmosphere throughout and generally good vibes, especially once the action on the pitch got more entertaining. 6 out of 10. Stadium quality. In the midst of renovation with one unlit portaloo to share between us. Not that it stopped the stand being used. Should be a brilliant place to watch football once complete. But for now, 3 out of 10. Beer and food at the stadium. Beer was cheap and charmingly served out of a cool box in VIP. Also seemed pretty easy to bring your own booze within limits. Sadly, no food or snacks though. 6 out of 10. Tourism. A country with an immense depth of natural wonders to go and see, though quite a distance from the captivating yet largely tourism-free capital. 5 out of 10. Accessibility. Nightmare to get to and a bit of an effort getting around, but very pleasant prices on arrival. 3 out of 10. People. People were lovely and friendly from my experience and had a wonderful time with them. However, there are issues of phone snatching to keep you on your toes and the unfortunate fact that homosexuality is illegal. Despite public opinion shifting in the right direction, this is still a law that is supported by many. 6 out of 10. Stadium surroundings. Walking distance from a nice mall with decent restaurants and a brilliant nightclub just around the corner at the local rugby club. 8 out of 10. History. The second most successful team in Uganda, but with no real continental success and no exposure outside the region. 2 out of 10. Ease and cost of ticket purchase. Tickets can be purchased from as low as £2 and be picked up outside the stadium on the day. Can't beat it really. 10 out of 10. In total, 51 out of 100. Not somewhere I'd specifically visit for football, but a really cool country and worth dropping in if you're in the region. If ticking off countries, then there will be plenty of choices of games to watch in Kampala. For me, in terms of personal accomplishments on this trip, it's the 26th country I've watched football and the first in Africa, bringing me to 5 continents. Just Australasia and Antarctica to go. An absolute pleasure as always to travel around the world enjoying the delights on offer. Thanks again for joining me, and until the next footy trip, take it easy.